Hey, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Shay Ryan Douglas, and today I'm here with Colleen Scott and Sally Douglas, and we're opening up the conversation once again on a Tuesday afternoon where we discuss all about life, all about values, all about how we live, what brings meaning to our lives, and connecting with those relationships. We've covered a whole diverse range of topics already in the last 3 months since we started these conversations, from compassion last week to integrity to motherhood, and a whole range of diverse chats, which you can find in the previous episodes. They're available on Earth Heroes TV through a podcast, or potentially even still on this Facebook page if you're watching it through that. Otherwise, today, I'm really excited because we're going to open up the conversation around self-sovereignty. Now, this is quite a big conversation. There's much to flesh out here. But I wanted to invite you, if you're watching right now, to drop a comment with any questions that you may have, or even just let us know where you're watching from. Join the conversation with us. I'll be navigating through the comment section, and we can ask these ladies their perspective, but would also like to hear your perspective, because this is a conversation more than anything. And it makes me very excited to introduce to you Colleen Scott and Sally Douglas. How are you both doing today?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, feeling good, thanks.
Excellent. So I guess we could just start out with the first question today. What does self-sovereignty mean to you?
I think to me it's about an honouring of self. So it's about considering how we treat ourselves. So this could be in all aspects of our self-care. So it might be in what we're eating, what we're choosing to engage in, what we're thinking, who we're choosing to be with. But it's actually about caring for self and really saluting ourselves and looking at ourselves as majestic beings. So I think that's how I would perceive it myself. Beautiful. Well said. I like that definition. Thanks. And gosh, quite often we think of sovereignty and we're usually maybe talking about countries, like countries being sovereign. So there's borders and boundaries and that sort of thing. And I kind of like that, taking that further with self and just you as a human being. So what does it mean to be sovereign? And so for me, it's like, well, it comes along with self-responsibility and the things that, like, what am I in charge of? What am I in control of? And so that can be everything from, at the end of the day, my thoughts are well and truly within my sovereign domain. My emotional states and how I choose to show up are in that space as well too. How I choose to show up energetically, the words that I use, the actions that I take, those are all within my control and my responsibility. And I can be sovereign around those. And how I choose to, the perspectives I choose to hold about, whether it's like other people or myself or experiences or the world for that matter. And with that, I feel boundaries is really tied in as well. So, how Sally was talking about that compassion of self, and how do I set those boundaries with respect to loving myself and knowing what is right for me in order to maintain that sovereignty. And last week we spoke a little bit about compassion. And I think that comes into play a little bit here as well too, because ultimately we want to set boundaries from a place of compassion, from a place of awareness and knowing what's right for us, but then communicating those boundaries in a loving and a compassionate way as well, I think is a big part of that.
Thanks, Colleen and Sally, for sharing. That's really great. We've just got news. Angie has joined us in the broadcast studio. She's made it. This is fantastic. And conversation that she has much wisdom and insights on around self-sovereignty. The key element there is the sovereign self, and what does it mean to be, to look at all elements of ourselves. And Colleen touched on this, which was great, because there's so many different aspects to being a human being, such as the physical, the psychological, the intellectual, the emotional, and the spiritual. And she tapped into a little bit on the national element of sovereignty, looking at a more environmental perspective. But I'm curious, Angie, on your perspective, how you relate to the word self-sovereignty, what that means for you, and how ultimately you can relay that understanding for those who are listening today.
Yeah, thank you, Shay. Thanks for letting me on last minute. We've had some internet problems here in Byron Bay, but I think I don't want to go round the wheel again. I'm not quite sure what the girls have said completely, but when I think of sovereignty, and it's a self-governing power in a way, it's a body of power. So if I think about self-sovereignty and my own sovereignty, it's really about being self-governing and being the authority over my own self, having dominion over myself. And I think to really feel into it as a sovereign being, we're embodied beings. We're very self-aware. We are very present. We're aware of other. We're aware of community. We are. We have a global awareness in relation to climate change, in relation to challenges, world challenges, etc. But coming from your own inner authority, it's whereby we're not fully influenced by the external environment, and we're not. We let our own inner authority and inner governance inform us as to how we want to create in the world, how we want to make change in the world. I know if you're looking from a political perspective, and not that I'm any kind of expert, far from it in that, in relation to that, but sovereign citizens, they do make up their own rules. They're very much rebellious of government authorities as such. And so I think it's such a buzzword in not just in the political system at the moment, but it's really a buzzword on a global perspective, particularly in the spiritual world. And it's really made its way into mainstream. As soon as humanity starts to feel as though they've lost their own control and power, there seems to have been an upsurge in people's sovereignty, in their own sovereignty, in their own inner guidance, in their own inner authority, and saying, no, we are not going to follow a particular set of rules as such. And they're starting to think about their own rights and their own ways of being and how they want to make change in the world. So maybe that's a long roundabout kind of way of looking at sovereignty. But
yeah, I really like that self-governing element to it, and the self-awareness, bringing it back to just on an individual level, on a personal level. Something that you ladies relate to often in these conversations is that level of embodying, the best version of yourself, to quote Colleen, who is something that we really tap into, is this inner work on the self, on the person, on my being, and how we can embody the inner freedoms related back to the inner self-sovereignty of having the tools, which we often speak about, equipping people with the tools to be able to reclaim their own sovereignty within themselves amidst, regardless of what's going on in the external environment. I'm also curious to tap into that conversation, on the political element and the national element, the kind of external third-party government role. However, with the next question, I'm keen to just weave into exploring deeper levels of finding or empowering others to find that sense of inner freedom, that inner sovereignty, that, of course, like if we look at some of the limits that are put on our society by these external parties, initially they would seem in the best interest for us and others. You know, like for example, a stop sign is put there as a limit for us to, you know, be cautious of traffic coming in inflow. But that is again the external and the outside environment based upon a third party governance. However, if we focus on that internal self-governing systems, there are potentially challenges in amongst that, such as mental mindset, not confusion, well, confusions as well as limits. And what I'm relating to here in this element is this mindset of scarcity, or this mindset of lack, or this mindset of not being good enough, or not having what it takes, or the self-talk that can be quite negative. And I guess where I'm going with this, and what I'm curious to ask you, is how does an individual take and reclaim their inner sovereignty, their self-sovereignty, by shifting, and Angie's already touched on this a little bit around the self-awareness element, but shifting that story to a sense of you know, a more expansive awareness of freedom and sovereignty and awareness. What does that take? What does it look like? I'm just curious to hear you ladies relate to that element of personal sovereignty.
I think what comes up when you make this suggestion, to me, it's about kindness. You know, really being kind to yourself. I think we also spoke about this last week in the compassion element, but it's also knowing that, you know, you deserve to be listened to, you deserve to be heard, you deserve to speak up, to have your voice. And you know, I think it's actually really understanding who you are. So it takes a lot of inner work and practice to actually to connect to that and really hold yourself with this it's an ease and a powerful grace, which I think sovereignty really relates for me to. It's like that real regalness of knowing exactly what you feel about things in the world and how you want to express that. And it's done with this really steady, positive and grounded energy. And it takes a lot of understanding to give yourself the space to be able to understand how you're reading things around you, what's happening, whether it's in the political environment or it's in the family environment, with relationships and the way you're reading the world, but what it really means to you, and being able to express that. And that really, for me, is about how you can hold your sovereignty in the world and how you can really share that. So I guess that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, oh gosh, there's so many ways that we can take this conversation, but awareness is absolutely the first key to that. You have to understand yourself and your inner workings in order to know how you want to show up in the world. And I find the sovereignty thing really interesting because I feel like there's often this kind of either or debate that happens. Like we either have to be all sovereign, and there's an assumption that people are going to be, you know, mean and only think about themselves, and it's going to be very detrimental to the collective. Or the other extreme is it's all about the collective, right? And I think those are based on false assumptions, for starters. I think that the more you are truly connected in a way to your divine sense of self, you realize that you're connected to everything and everyone around you. So I feel like when you have awareness, you're going to show up doing, yes, the right thing for you, but also you're going to be very aware of how that impacts those around you and the environment, for that matter, or other cultures, or, you know, take it as far out as you want to go. So I think, and I find it also interesting that it seems like the more that things are taken away from people, like people not making those decisions. A stop sign's like a perfect example. Don't get me wrong, we need stop signs. There's a reason for traffic flow, blah, blah, blah. But I find that the more that people are not having to take responsibility for how they're showing up in life and their choices, the worse off they become, because they start to lose that ability to tap in and have that awareness and then be responsible for the thoughts, their emotional states, the words that they say, the actions that they take. It's like they're so confined by rules that they're no longer thinking and being proactive in that space of being responsible and for their sovereignty and the impact that it has.
I think, yeah, Cole, great to expand on that. And I'm not sure if I've still got the thread of your question, Shay, but I think it's really about how do we move from the system of duality, the right and wrong, and the belief systems that we are conditioned within our own, the belief systems that live within our own conditioning, which what makes up humanity. How do we dissolve the ego as such? How do we dissolve that duality system and our addiction to that duality, and remember that we are sovereign beings, which is being a part of non-duality, like remembering our Christ consciousness, remembering that we are our own creators, remembering that we are unconditional love, and tapping into our own soul purpose and creating from there. So moving from humanity into divinity, which is the divine unconditional love, the innocence that we are, innocence that we're born with prior to all our patterning and conditioning, our belief systems that we've learnt. They're all learned behaviours from parents or peers or teachers, or however we've navigated our human design as such. But to come into being real sovereign beings is when we have dissolved this duality system and surrendered our ego as such. I mean, a healthy ego is good, but remembering that our higher self, remembering our inner power, the innocence in which we were born with, and creating from that space. And I think that's where, when we get still enough, which is a real requirement in relation to coming into sovereignty, we're able to listen to the voice of our soul, listen to what the planet requires, listen to what we require, what others require, what community requires, and create from that space. And there has been such a huge surge, an upsurge of particularly in young people who are wanting to say, hey, we don't want to live like this anymore, and want to change the world. And they haven't got the conditioning so much that we have in our 50s and 60s, and they weren't parented the way that we were parented. And so I think that the young people within our population have got a huge, not a responsibility, it's more like an opportunity to create change from their own capacity to still be in their innocence, and to not be so ingrained with certain patterns and conditions. So really, maybe the short answer is, how do we get from humanity into divinity, and what's that bridge? Or maybe that's the question.
Yeah, great question. I love that, and we could flesh that out a little bit more. I love where you took that in terms of dissolving the ego, recognizing that it's a valuable part of our identity. Yet if we can evolve from an attachment to the identity that we're all separate individuals, but we come to recognize the fundamental knowing of our existence of who am I, or who are we, as human beings, then we can recognize the deeper interconnectedness of all of humans and all of life. and into relating that to this deeper level of consciousness that we are all connected and we're all a part of this great fabric web of life. And I love that question that you pose, Angie, and what does it look like for humanity to move towards divinity? And maybe that's a question in itself. What is divinity? What is the ideal? What are we moving towards if everything played out to really attract and manifest paradise on this earth, to live a heaven on earth experience? What is the divine creation of what's possible for humanity on earth? And if we embody this deeper sense of self-sovereignty within, what does that look like in the external environment?
Well, peace on earth for a start, I think. Less external conflict, and the bridge. If we're talking about less chaos, that the bridge for that external conflict starts within us with our own internal conflict. And so both the girls have touched on it in relation to knowing yourself. It's know thyself to heal thyself, and to be aware of your own shadow, to be aware of your own dark and light, to be understand your own inner masculine and inner feminine, and using that beautiful fire of the feminine and the action of the divine masculine to merge into one, and sort of embody the higher self. But the higher self is unconditional love. The higher self doesn't function from a duality system. It is one. We are all one, and we're a reflection of, we are one cleverly disguised as 7 billion in the world, and we show up as a collective, but in actual fact, when we remember that there's only one of us, and if we were all to function from that place, I think the world we would create a more balanced world, a more inclusive world, less conflict, more peace. But I think the virtues of that is, honouring your dark and light and integrating that, and being inclusive of the whole. And I think the other girls have mentioned many other virtues that would be able to support that bridge from humanity into divinity.
I think touching on what it would look like, I think it would be an incredible harmonious living we would find, which would be a community connection of, I think the first word you said was peace on earth, but heaven on earth would definitely be a supportive collective energy which we would all contribute to. So I think sovereignty really encapsulates that. It starts with ourselves, and if we can practice that ourselves and show that to the people we're relating to, then we're on the right steps towards that. And it can be a beautiful place where we can live together in a very harmonious state.
Yeah, I think I love that the quote, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And it's something I've used on my Facebook page and website from the beginning, because for me, that awareness state is the key to everything. And when we can recognize that we are everything, like Angie has already spoken about, the light, the dark, the masculine, the feminine, the ego and the divine all together. And it's just about recognizing like who's leading. And is that serving how I want to show up and how I want to be here and how I want to contribute to the world at large? And I feel being in that space, it is that peace on earth, or that heaven on earth. And there would be much more creativity, I feel, is another thing that would really be thrown in there, because if people are really understanding themselves and tapping into their passion, and we have the freedom and the ability to express ourselves unconditionally, and collaborate together, as opposed to being in competition or fighting for resources or scarcity. It's like how can everybody rise together I feel would be more the focus. And when we tap into that divinity, we're being led by those higher states of self, so that we can be connected, not only within ourselves, but within each other and the world as well, which would have huge impacts in how the earth is treated. And yeah, so I think those are probably just a few of the ways that.
Wow, I love where this conversation's going. I really love all your input there. It's fantastic. It just gets, deeper and deeper as we kind of unpack it more and the layers peel back. It seems where this conversation is going is a conversation around self-mastery. And we've all acknowledged that self-mastery begins with self-discovery. Yet if someone is on that journey, what does it look like to work towards this divine self, this enlightened sense of self? How do we practice, embody, and really allow ourselves to receive that journey that we're on to become this master of our own lives, a master of ourselves? What are the steps that are necessary and needed to take in order to ascend to that higher vibrational level of being fully embodied in the self-sovereign self, in the self-mastery, in the next evolutionary progression? What does that really take if we're willing to be diligent and do the work? What are the steps that are necessary in order for us to achieve that on an individual level, to replicate that out to peace on earth?
I think that's one of the big words, willingness to look at all of the shadows, the darkness, and to work through it. It takes a lot of commitment to do the work. And I think for everyone, it might be different modalities that they connect to. And it progresses, I think, as you explore and you go deeper. So I think it's there's not one hat that fits all, but I think that it starts with steps. And willingness is a really big part of it, Shay. I really believe that commitment and willingness is probably, and discipline to continue to do the work and keep going and go deeper and keep looking, keep asking, keep being curious. Yeah.
It was just curiosity was definitely the one thing that springs to mind with that. And I find it really interesting, like looking back at some of our recent conversations, in order to step into all of those things, it's about being able to listen to yourself effectively and to do it with curiosity and compassion. Is a really big side of that, because if we start going down that pathway and we go with, judgment and condemnation of like who we were, or things we may have done in the past, or how we showed up in the past, I'd like that phrase about, when you know better, do better. And I think it's really about that. So just being able to have those reflective practices, and whether that's, just making it a ritual in the evening, just reflecting on how your day was and how you showed up in that day, whether you have a journaling practice as well too, so you can kind of unpack things that are happening for you, whether they're actions or thoughts or emotional states or experiences you need to get a little bit more clarity on, but doing it from a place of curiosity and compassion and open-heartedness as well too, so that you can learn from that and then become a better person and still love the person you were, because that person has helped shape where you are now too. And we can't love ourselves but hate the experiences that shaped us. They come together too. So,
yeah. That's a great point, Cole. The word that stays with me in relation to all of this is actual judgment. And how do we surrender our judgment? How do we surrender our opinions? How do we come into allowance of the whole, simply by coming into allowance of ourselves, and through the practice of self-forgiveness, through being transparent, through being vulnerable, accountability practices, through taking self-responsibility for our thoughts, our feelings, and our emotions, looking at what meanings we're giving to things, and because our perception creates our projection, and how we want to show up in the world. So, and I think honesty is self-honesty is another really, and it's challenging. Honesty is really challenging because sometimes it's our unconscious beliefs that are driving us, and we're not even aware, but to really go a little bit deeper within ourselves and really look at what's really moving, what's really driving us, and then the deeper we go, the more we can come into remembering the divinity within ourselves. And as above is below, as within is without. And talking about quotes, I love that. If you're not prepared to go within, be prepared to go without, and that is such a beautiful way of gaining abundance, when you're willing to look at the essence of who you are, the good, the bad, and the fugly, and really let go of all of that, surrender everything that is, knowing that it's your conditioning and it's not the essence of who you are. And then you come into your true self, when you can dissolve the false self as such. And it's a natural progression of functioning from that divinity within you, your divine self. And behavior, I think, naturally just changes because you're not in the judgment of other. You're in total allowance of the whole. And that other beautiful word Cole used in relation to collaboration, because when you're no longer in competition with other, you're more willing to collaborate, and you create this abundance of ideas, and that's how that's how you see change within the world, and it increases the frequency and the vibration of life. And then the magnetic, if we want to go more cosmically, the magnetic attraction changes. And then there's a ripple effect all over the world, the 100 monkey syndrome, and, the butterfly effect, whatever it is that you want to call it. But it's really about, if you want to change the world, change yourself.
Yeah, and I think I would just want to add to about laughter and play, because I think that's the other thing I notice with a lot of these concepts. Like sometimes I feel people just take them a little bit too seriously, and I think it's good to be able to lighten it by being able to laugh at yourself. And I know with my husband and I, we used to have this thing, especially as we're learning new ways to be or communicate or interact. There are times you're not going to do it so well, and being able to pull yourself up just with that kind of thing, like, oh wow, I didn't do that well today, did I? And doing it from a place of laughter and recognizing, yeah, we're gonna, mess up on this pathway. That's, part of being human, and we just need to not take things so seriously all the time too. Great tip.
Yeah, I love it, ladies. Thank you so much for sharing. Feels like such deep inner wisdom coming through today, just channeling that higher spirit, the divinities flowing through your vehicles, this body, this voices that you have to share. So I really appreciate you being so willing to just share your experience and your perspective with the world. It's a beautiful opportunity that we have to connect on these Tuesday afternoon calls, and every week it flows naturally and organically and so fluidly that we get to this beautiful point in our discussion where we really bring it back to the divine source that is within all of us. That is that joyful, happy, loving, beautiful, high vibing state that we have all the potential to reach and remember and tap into. So I want to thank you for joining me today and for sharing, as we do every week. Curious if you have any closing statements. I really loved what you all shared, and it feels super powerful and life-changing for many. Just to even hear the resonance of the words can really just empower people to begin that journey, that curious journey of what does that mean for me, and how do I relate to that? It's a great little stepping stone to the path. So, any last closing statements, ladies?
I think you stand tall and proud for a sovereign being in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that embodying unconditional love and having an understanding of what that is has the power to birth new realities. You know, it's got the power to create a spiritual revolution. And coming from this heart-centered, heart-directed, love-based divinity within ourselves, I guess, is really kind of what's required to birth these new realities and to move us into new paradigms, and not be run by our fear-based reality as such.
Yeah, and I think I just like that, just reminding people that these are daily practices, and we get to restart over every single day, and just remember this is it's not a destination that we're necessarily all racing towards, and just to be gentle with yourself on this pathway of growth and awareness. Yeah, beautiful.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, ladies, and look forward to seeing you next week again. Thank you guys for watching this, and if you liked it, please leave us a like or a comment about what you did or didn't like, and maybe share it with your friends if you found it valuable. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for